Hello everyone, my name is Nora, and today I'd like to share a chapter of my life that I'll never forget. Every time I think about it, a heavy feeling settles in my heart, and I can't help but blame myself. It's a story I wish I could erase, but life doesn't always give us that option. It all began years ago when I was 18. Living with my family in Italy, a city as beautiful as it is mysterious at the time, I thought I had everything. My family was well off, and both my parents were thriving in their careers. My father was a successful businessman, and my mother was an accomplished interior designer. Despite their busy schedules, they always found time for me and my two older twin brothers, Joseph and Anthony. Joseph and Anthony were 2 years older than I was, and I would characterize them as such. They made sure I had everything I could ever need, whether it was material things or affection. But to be honest, the love my parents showed me, as wonderful as it was, never felt quite the same as the love I received from Joseph and Anthony. Their bond with me was something special before we go any further into this story. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to hear more fascinating true stories. Make sure to watch until the end and show your support by hitting the like button. Trust me, you won't want to miss this story. They were more than just brothers. They were my protectors, always looking out for me. The way they loved me seemed more profound than my parents' love because they always expressed it through action. My parents loved me by providing me with a comfortable life, but Joseph and Anthony went above and beyond. When I was sad, they noticed even if I didn't say anything. When I was younger, I could always confide in them without fear of judgment, regardless of whether I fell or faced bullying. When classmates mocked me for the dress I was wearing at school, Joseph and Anthony were the first to step in and defend me. When I came home crying, they didn't just console me. They went to the school to confront those kids. They didn't use violence, but their sharp words and cold demeanor ensured that those kids never bothered me again. They were like heroes, always ready to help whenever I needed it. I remember the evenings when our entire family would gather, but I always wanted to sit between Joseph and Anthony. They'd wrap their arms around me, sometimes even playfully arguing over who would sit next to me. They always joked about me being their little princess and swore it was their lifelong duty to protect me. Over time, I realized that their love for me was unlike anyone else's. They were also the first to help me overcome my teenage body image issues. Anthony would spend evenings teaching me how to apply light makeup and reassuring me that I was beautiful just the way I was. Joseph, who always called me the cutest little sister in the world, helped me pick out clothes. I felt valued, and their love was special, not just my brothers. With my parents at work, Joseph and Anthony were my emotional rock and drove me to school. They helped me with my homework and assured me that I never felt lonely late at night. If I couldn't sleep, I would knock on their door, and they would always greet me with a warm smile. Sometimes, they would tell me amusing stories or simply sit by me until I fell asleep. It was those small things that made me believe their love for me was far greater than anything I ever received from my parents. But that love, which I thought was pure and innocent, would eventually lead to a "I'll share the rest." When I muster the courage to confront that aspect of my memory, I recall it vividly because, as the youngest member of the family, I frequently engaged in silly behavior. Without fear of reprimanding, I would occasionally jump in and hug them, or casually sit on their laps. If they were sitting somewhere, Joseph and Anthony were not just my brothers. They were my closest friends, people I never felt shy around, even when showing affection. One afternoon, a warm summer day, I walked out of my bedroom. The sunlight streamed through the large living room window, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Joseph and Anthony were sitting on the sofa, focused on the TV. I didn't know what they were watching, but they looked very absorbed in it without thinking. I walked closer, rubbing my eyes. They didn't notice me approaching, so I mischievously asked, "What are you doing now?" I chuckled, said nothing, and settled comfortably on their laps, resting my head on Joseph's shoulder. "What are you two watching so intently?" I inquired, but did not receive an immediate response. When I glanced at the screen, I realized it was a romantic film, and just as the film was reaching its emotional climax, the two characters on screen were hugging and kissing passionately. Seeing me staring at the screen, Joseph and Anthony became awkward. I smiled shyly and quickly covered my eyes with his hand. "Don't look, Nora. This isn't a kid's movie." I laughed, attempting to escape his grasp. "I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 18. I teased, though secretly I found the scene quite interesting. I continued trying to peek through Anthony's fingers, laughing and teasing them at the same time. At that moment, whether intentional or not, my hand brushed something inside Anthony's pocket. The hard, warm feeling startled me, and my heart raced, so I quickly pulled my hand back. I didn't dare look at Joseph or Anthony. "I'm sorry," I stammered then. I quickly stood up and ran into my room. I slammed the door behind me, my heart pounding. I sat on my bed wondering what had just happened. The image of the remote control in Anthony's pocket kept replaying in my mind, making my face flush. Was I overthinking it, or was it an accident I didn't know? But the shame and embarrassment lingered, and I couldn't bring myself to leave my room. The thought of what Joseph and Anthony might think of me kept me in my room, unable to shake off the image that haunted me. Not just the physical touch, but the uncomfortable realization that I had crossed a line I never even knew existed between us. The closeness we shared seemed to have a fragile boundary, one I had never thought about before. That evening, after hiding in my room for a while, I decided to go down to the closeness we shared, which seemed to have a fragile boundary I had never thought about before. After hiding in my room for a while, I decided to go down to the living room. I was getting hungry, and I knew my family was probably waiting for me to join them for dinner. But the events of the afternoon still lingered in my mind, and I felt a bit embarrassed. I kept wondering if Joseph and Anthony were thinking about what had happened, but then I reassured myself that maybe it wasn't as serious as I thought, and perhaps they had already forgotten about it. I opened the door quietly and tiptoed down the hallway, hoping not to meet their eyes as I approached the living room. I stopped to listen for any sounds. I tiptoed into the living room, looking around, afraid I'd catch their gaze, but to my surprise, no one was there. How strange, I thought, and paused in front of the sofa where I had sat with them earlier that afternoon. I was still trying to figure out which channel was on the TV when two faces leaned down, looking in the same direction as me. "What are you doing, Nora?" Anthony's voice rang out right next to my ear, making me jump. Joseph laughed loudly from the other side, adding, "You look like a thief." I let out a small scream from shock, turning around to see them standing right behind me. Their sudden appearance nearly stopped my heart, and we all jumped out at the same time. Anthony and Joseph glanced at me and erupted into laughter, leaving me unable to contain my amusement and fear. "Oh my God, you frightened me beyond comprehension," I exclaimed. I was pretending to be angry, but I couldn't help but laugh, feeling as if I had just been unexpectedly teased. "How about you? You appear to be up to something." Shady Joseph raised his brow, smiling mischievously, and Anthony patted my head teasingly. "You're not going to eat anything, are you?" I laughed along with them at that point. The awkward tension from the afternoon had subsided, I reassured myself. I reasoned that what I had touched earlier must not have been what I had imagined, as otherwise the two of them would not be laughing like this. With that thought, I felt a sense of relief, and tried to act as if nothing had happened. I was just checking to see if anyone was here. I smiled brightly, attempting to change the subject. "What are you two doing behind me?" Anthony shrugged. "Are you trying to scare me?" Joseph added, "I was merely attempting to scare you a bit, but I didn't anticipate your reaction to be so startling." His voice was lighthearted. "Who would have thought you'd jump up like that?" Your expression was truly precious. The atmosphere became lighter and more cheerful as we all burst into laughter. At this point, Joseph placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Okay, let's go eat. The whole family is waiting for you." You nodded, smiled, and followed them. The family had already gathered around the dining table when I entered the kitchen. My parents smiled gently when they saw me come in, and I sat down, feeling the warmth of the kitchen and the peaceful, cozy environment. During dinner, the conversation was full of laughter. My parents talked about work, while Joseph and Anthony occasionally teased me with light jokes. I joined in, and the feeling of embarrassment from earlier seemed to have completely disappeared. After finishing dinner, I felt, despite the fact that I was still embarrassed from the afternoon and the teasing, I was no longer anxious. I smiled to myself, assuring myself that everything would be okay. Joseph and Anthony are still the best brothers I've ever had, and with that, I fell asleep peacefully. However, the next morning was not entirely peaceful, with only a thin wall separating Joseph and Anthony's rooms, allowing even the smallest sounds, like movies or music, to be audible. I was known for sleeping late, but that morning I awoke at 8 a.m. I thought I was still dreaming, or that the sunlight through the curtains was blinding me. But after a few minutes of waking up, I realized there was a strange sound coming from the next room. My room was located between Joseph and Anthony's rooms, and our house had thin walls, so even the slightest noise could travel easily. I was used to hearing them play games or talk, but this time the sound was different. At first, I assumed they were watching an action movie, but the longer I listened, the more convinced I became that something was wrong. The sound wasn't like typical movie noises, and it had a strange rhythm to it. My heart raced, and a thought burst into my mind, causing my face to flush. I didn't want to believe it, but the sound became clearer. It wasn't music, and it wasn't just regular talking either. Even though the walls blocked the sound, I could still hear rapid, sensual noises mixed with heavy breathing. I tried to ignore it, but the more I listened, the more certain I became that Joseph and Anthony were watching something. A rush of shame came over me. Why am I awake? Why did I have to listen? My heart rate increased, and I felt as if I were burning. I put my hands over my face, attempting to stop the thoughts that were invading my mind. This is a private matter. I told myself that everyone has seen things like that, including myself, but hearing it coming from their room made me uncomfortable. We had always been close, and I never imagined myself in this situation, but the sound seemed to cling to me more and more. I sat up, got out of bed, and quietly opened my door. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay still any longer. I walked softly down the hallway, trying not to make any noise, but as I approached Joseph and Anthony's door, the sound became so clear that it felt like the walls had vanished. I stood there, unsure what to do. My heart was pounding, and I felt embarrassed, confused, and uncertain. I had always known that these things happened, but hearing it from Joseph and Anthony's room was a completely different experience. I bit my lip, unsure whether I should return to my room or remain where I was, curious about the best of myself, and I leaned against the door, attempting to calm myself. The sound only grew louder, drawing me in. The door swung open, and I stepped backward. Anthony surprised me by standing in front of me, his eyes wide with shock, as if he had become entangled in something he shouldn't have been doing. We stood there facing each other for what seemed like an eternity, the silence unbearable. Anthony cleared his throat. "I'm trying to break the tension, Nora." "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice flustered, avoiding eye contact, his face red, and I could tell he was as embarrassed as I was. I couldn't look at him because my heart was racing as I tried to speak. "I was just passing by," I stammered. It didn't sound convincing, but it was the only thing I could think of at the time. Just then, the sounds inside the room abruptly stopped. Joseph walked out from behind Anthony's face as red as Anthony's. They both exchanged glances, trying to find the right explanation, but no one said anything. The awkward silence was overwhelming, and I forced an uncomfortable smile to hide my embarrassment. "I was just passing by." I repeated nothing. "I am leaving." I turned and walked away, eager to get out of the situation. When I returned to my room, I quickly closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My heart was still racing, and a strange, embarrassing feeling washed over me. I couldn't stop replaying the awkward scene in my head. The image of Noah opening the door and Joseph's expression when he stepped out lingered in my mind. The atmosphere between the three of us was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was constantly wondering what they were thinking about me at that moment. Maybe they felt as awkward as I did, or perhaps even more so. What bothered me most was overhearing something inappropriate. It might have been an unfortunate accident, but I feared it would change how I saw Joseph and Anthony, my two closest companions, my brothers, my protectors. Although I covered my face, the negative thoughts got louder as I tried to ignore them. So I told myself this was just an unexpected moment no one wanted. Maybe I was overthinking it, but I couldn't help it. I stood up, pacing around my room, trying to shake off the unease. It was just an accident. I muttered to myself as if trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal, but deep down I felt like something needed to change. Something had to make this feel normal again. Just then, I heard a knock on my door. My heart sank. I knew it. It couldn't be my parents. They didn't usually knock when they needed me, so Joseph or Anthony had to do it. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves before opening the door, and when I did, I saw Anthony standing there, still looking flustered, his eyes averted, clearly trying to regain his composure. He scratched his head awkwardly, a shy smile on his lips. "Nora, I'm sorry about what happened." "Joseph, it wasn't what you thought it was. We were just watching a movie, and perhaps the timing wasn't right." I stood still for a moment, looking at him with hesitant eyes. His face was red, his gaze uncertain, and I could feel the confusion in his voice. Then Joseph stepped up behind him, his face showing the same shyness and embarrassment as Anthony's. These two were trying to find the right words, but the tension was so thick we couldn't speak. We felt like we were waiting for someone to speak. I realized that if this awkward moment continued, it would be so uncomfortable, so I took a deep breath and decided to break the ice. I smiled, embarrassed but trying to sound casual. I tried to lighten the mood by saying, "Come on, I didn't mean to make things awkward." "Don't look so tense. I was just passing by." Anthony and Joseph exchanged a look, silently communicating with their eyes. After a moment, Anthony sighed and smiled faintly. "Are you sure?" "Nora, do you feel comfortable?" he inquired, his voice filled with uncertainty. I immediately reassured them, attempting to alleviate their concerns. "No, I'm fine. In fact, I think I even love you both." More, I quickly added more, hoping to make them laugh. They both looked at me in surprise, and for a brief moment, there was a silent understanding between us. Then I thought of a way to make things less awkward. I took Anthony's hand and pointed to Joseph's. "Let's go to my room and talk." "Okay, let's consider this a way to make up for the awkwardness," I suggested. They were surprised by the suggestion but nodded after a moment. It seemed like the only way to break the tension, so I smiled and turned to walk toward my room, with the two of them slowly following behind. When the three of us sat down on my bed, I decided to lighten the mood by telling a joke. Looking at Joseph, I teased, "The movie was so good that you both lost track of time." Joseph laughed awkwardly, covering his face with his, "Come on, Nora, stop teasing. It's just that we didn't think you would hear it." I explained that I thought you'd turned it up so I could hear it. With a playful raise of my brow that made both of us laugh, the tension seemed to vanish for a moment. After engaging in a lengthy conversation, my curiosity overcame me. I looked at Joseph and Anthony, wondering if I should bring up the thought that had just crossed my mind. After a brief hesitation, I mustered up the courage and asked, "How about we try doing it like in that movie?" The words slipped out before I could stop myself, and I immediately regretted them. I was uncertain about their reaction, yet my curiosity overcame me, causing Joseph and Anthony to turn their wide eyes towards me, taken aback by my words. "Are you serious?" Joseph inquired, his voice confused. He seemed as if he couldn't believe I was proposing something so daring. I nodded, trying to maintain a serious expression. I was just curious. It wouldn't hurt to try, right? I spoke, despite my voice fading and my inability to look them in the eye. Anthony quickly responded with a firm tone, and both of them turned their heads away from me. However, I persisted, gently squeezing their hands in an attempt to reassure them and encourage them to give it a try. They were silent for a while, and after a moment, I could see the conflict in their eyes. Joseph sighed and, with a look of helplessness, said, "Okay, but just this once, and we have to keep it a secret. No one can know the room became still. We all just sat there, breathing quietly, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We began cautiously. Every movement, every action was careful, but also full of a strange energy. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it felt like the world around us had vanished, leaving just the three of us when it was all over. The sun had risen high, filling the room with light. We didn't say anything. We just lay there. As we lay next to each other, breathing evenly, the awkwardness I had feared completely vanished. I felt a deeper connection between us, as if we had just gone through something intense together. We went into the kitchen to prepare. Lunch and everything felt oddly natural, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, I knew that the boundary between us had shifted, and instead of regret, I felt a new bond, one that brought us closer than before. Joseph looked at me with a soft smile. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I nodded, returning his smile. "I'm fine, and I think I love you both even more," replied the words. Made me blush, but they held my hand with warmth. Their eyes filled with affection. "We love you too," they said, and we continued eating. From that day on, our relationship subtly but clearly changed. Our closeness was now deeper. There was no awkwardness, and any invisible distance between us fell away. Every time our eyes met, I could feel a new understanding, a closeness that had never been there before. But deep down, I knew what we did was wrong. We had unknowingly crossed a boundary. Breaking the boundaries that society and morality had set, I tell myself it was because of the impulsive curiosity of youth. I don't try to justify it, but it was our emotions and curiosity that led us down this path. While I don't regret it, there are moments when I still experience a vague sense of anxiety. We don't talk about it anymore, as if it's an unspoken agreement to leave it. In the past, the way Joseph and Anthony are now. Look at me, they treat me differently. They are now treating me more gently and carefully, as if they are afraid to cause me pain. As for me, every time I meet their gaze, my heart races between excitement and unease. Our curiosity led us down a path we never anticipated, while our bond has grown closer. I know it has also changed. Forever looking back, I see how my impulsive actions left a mark on our relationship, a mark I can never erase. We crossed a line guided only by our emotions and curiosity. Though no one else knows, I can't escape the truth within myself. Every reflection brings the same realization how naive I was. That thought lingers as a constant reminder of what I've come to understand. Curiosity is natural, especially when you're young, but not all curiosity should be acted upon. Some boundaries exist to protect us from making mistakes that can leave lasting scars. Instead of restricting us, boundaries protect life's most precious things. Sometimes holding back and staying grounded is the wisest course. My story serves as a reminder to pause and reflect before acting on fleeting impulses. While strong emotions may fade over time, their consequences can endure a lifetime. Respect, understanding, and a shared sense of responsibility form the foundation of true love and lasting connections. Value the relationships you have and don't jeopardize them for momentary desires. The things that truly matter are worth holding on to,